The night my company declared bankruptcy, I received two messages that carved themselves into my bones. The first came from my sister Chloe. "Congrats, Izzy. You finally proved what we all knew. You're a failure." The second came from my mother. "From this moment on, you are no longer part of this family. Do not come home." 3 hours later, my bank accounts were frozen. My employees had scattered, and my parents went on a local news segment saying the disgrace of the Reyes family had brought shame to our name. I held my 6-year-old daughter in a freezing garage behind a neighbor's house, watching her breath fog into white clouds. She burned with fever while my debit card kept getting declined at the ER, the nurse refusing to check her in because we don't accept patients with outstanding fraud investigations. I truly believed that night was the end of everything I had built, everything I had fought for, until a black Bentley rolled up to the garage, its headlights cutting through the darkness, and a man in a gray suit lowered the window and said, "Miss Reyes, I represent Mr. Tobias Calloway." Before he passed, he left a message. "For you." And with that sentence, my life split in two, before the Bentley and after it. I pressed Maya closer to my chest as the man stepped out of the car. Her skin radiated an unnatural heat, her eyelids fluttering like she was struggling to stay awake. I wanted to scream for help, but the panic lodged itself in my throat. The garage around us smelled of rust and cold cement, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there. Just a few hours earlier, I had still clung to some fragile hope that things might turn around. I had walked out of the courthouse after the bankruptcy hearing, trying to stay upright, telling myself that a Chapter 11 filing didn't mean I was a criminal. It just meant I couldn't fight Apex Data Systems and their fake evidence any longer. But then, the judges requested additional financial records. Then, news reporters chased me, shoving microphones at my face. Then my lawyer muttered that Apex came prepared to bury us, and his voice carried a resignation that scared me more than the bankruptcy itself. By the time I made it back to my rented townhouse, 3 investors had already withdrawn statements of support, citing lack of trust. My neighbors avoided eye contact. Even the barista at the coffee shop where I'd gone for a moment of air looked at me like I was contagious. I left my drink untouched and went home to find the foreclosure notice taped crookedly to my door. I remember standing there with Maya holding her doll beside me, asking Mommy, "Why did someone put paper on our house?" I didn't have an answer then. I barely do now. By nightfall, I had loaded 2 suitcases into my old SUV and driven to Mrs. Landry's place, a widow in her 70s, who lived 2 streets over and had once babysat Maya. She saw my face, saw my daughter asleep in the back seat, and didn't ask questions. She simply handed me a blanket and said, "The garage is all I have, sweetheart, but it's yours for tonight." But one night became 2, and then 3. And now, with Maya burning up in my arms, I felt like I was watching my entire life collapse in slow motion. The man in the suit approached carefully, his shoes splashing through shallow puddles of rainwater pooled on the driveway. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't a debt collector. He didn't look like press. He looked like someone who never stepped anywhere without being chauffeured there. I straightened my back, trying to look braver than I felt. "I don't know who you are, or what you want, but my daughter is sick. Unless you're here to help, I am." His voice was calm, even gentle. He reached into his coat and pulled out an embossed card. "My name is Elias Mercer. I'm with Calloway and Price Law Group." The name hit me like a slap. Calloway. As in Tobias Calloway, the reclusive billionaire who owned half the logistics infrastructure of the Pacific Northwest, the man whose face had appeared on Forbes for 20 straight years, the man whispered about in business schools like some mythical figure of ruthless genius. But I had never met him, never worked with him, never even stood in the same zip code as him. "You have the wrong person," I said, voice cracking. "Why would someone like him know anything about me?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, he glanced at Maya. "We should get her inside the car. She needs fluids and heat." "I tried the ER," I said bitterly. "They wouldn't take us." "Not surprising," he murmured. Your name is all over local news right now. People react poorly to what they don't understand. I hesitated. Everything about this felt surreal. But then Maya whimpered in my arms, a weak, frightened sound, and something inside me surrendered. Elias moved closer and extended his hands. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust anyone, but I nodded. He lifted Maya as if she were the most fragile thing on earth and carried her to the Bentley. The back seat, glowing with warm yellow lights, looked like a different world entirely. He wrapped her in a heated blanket, checked her pulse, then passed me a bottle of electrolyte solution. "She'll need a doctor, but this will help stabilize her," he said. My vision blurred with tears. "Why are you helping us?" Then Elias reached into his coat again and withdrew a sealed envelope, heavy cream-colored, sealed with dark red wax stamped with an ornate C. He held it out. "This is why." I stared at it. My name was written in looping handwriting across the front, Isabella Reyes. Fresh ink. Someone had written this recently. My hands trembled as I took it. The wax was unbroken. "Tobias Calloway instructed that this envelope be delivered to you in the event of his death," Elias said quietly. "And only when you were at your lowest point." I felt a pulse of fear. "Why would a billionaire leave anything for me I'm not permitted to explain?" he said. "Not yet. But he insisted you receive this personally." His exact words were, "When she believes her world is over, give her the truth." The wind howled through the trees. Rain hammered against the metal siding of the garage. Inside the Bentley, Maya let out a soft sigh as the warmth began to reach her skin. I clutched the envelope to my chest, unable to breathe. "My world is over," I whispered, more to myself than him. "Everything is gone. My company, my home, my family." "Not everything," Elias said gently but firmly. "Mr. Calloway left something behind for you. Something that will change all of this." He stepped back, motioning toward the car. "Miss Reyes, please get in. We're taking you and your daughter to the Calloway estate." "It's what he wanted." I stared at him, then at Maya, then at the envelope in my hands. Nothing made sense. Not the Bentley, not the lawyer, not the billionaire's name on the wax seal, not the idea that somewhere, somehow, Tobias Calloway had known me. But the cold was slicing into Maya's small body, and I had nowhere else left to go. I climbed into the back seat beside my daughter, holding her hand in mine as the door clicked shut and sealed out the storm. The interior smelled faintly of leather and citrus, warm and safe in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. The envelope sat on my lap like a living thing. "Miss Reyes," Elias said from the front seat as the engine purred to life, "whatever happened to you, whatever they took from you, I promise you tonight is not the end." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "It is the beginning." The Bentley pulled away from the freezing garage, its headlights carving a path through the rain, and I held Maya close, my fingers tight around the envelope that would soon turn my entire world upside down. The morning before everything collapsed, I stood inside the glass-walled corner office of Novagard Cyber Defense, watching the city of Portland drift awake beneath a blanket of soft gray fog. For a brief, foolish moment, I let myself pretend life was still steady, still mine. From the 42nd floor, the streets looked calm, distant, nothing like the battlefield that waited for me just hours later. My phone buzzed non-stop beside me, vibrating against the marble ledge, flashing updates from investors, reporters, anonymous emails, even former clients. All of them circling the same rumor: something was wrong with Novagard. Something big. I tried to ignore it. I tried to breathe. I tried to believe that the walls around me, walls I'd built with a decade of late nights and debt and grit, were solid enough to withstand whatever storm was brewing. But deep down, some instinct inside me already knew. You always know when the ground under you is starting to give way. When the anonymous email arrived, it didn't surprise me that much. What surprised me was the timing. The subject line read, "Stop digging into the wrong servers if you want to survive." Just that. No signature. No logo. No trail. I stared at it until my pulse climbed into my throat, because no one outside a tiny circle of my engineering team should have known I was auditing internal logs. And definitely no one should have known that I suspected a breach coming from someone inside the company. My hands trembled as I closed my laptop. For a moment, I stood still, hearing only the hum of servers in the room next door and the distant echo of my employees chatting by the elevator. But the email felt heavier than digital words. It felt like a hand gripping the back of my neck. My phone buzzed again, this time with a FaceTime request from Chloe. I nearly declined it, but answering would be easier than dealing with her. "Why didn't you pick up messages later?" So I accepted. My sister's face filled the screen, perfect makeup, camera angled just right, the kind of curated glamour she lived in. "Are you melting down yet?" she asked, way too cheerfully. I blinked. "It's 8:30 in the morning." "Exactly," she said, twirling a strand of her highlighted hair. "Prime meltdown time for a woman whose company is circling the drain." I felt my jaw clench. "Chloe, I don't have time." She cut me off. "You know investors talk." And one of them said something that made me think. She paused, her smile sharpening. "If Dad knew what I know, he would have disowned you sooner." That sentence stayed with me long after she hung up, like a shard of glass stuck under my skin. I tried to shake it off, tried to bury myself in the day's tasks. By late morning, the office was buzzing with anxiety. My engineers whispered in tight huddles. My executive assistant canceled 2 meetings without explanation. Even the interns looked at me with a kind of nervous pity, as if they could sense the world tilting under my feet. Around noon, my chief security engineer, Priya, slipped into my office, eyes wide behind her glasses. "Izzy," she whispered, closing the door behind her, "there's a problem." My stomach tightened. "Tell me." "We found unusual access requests from an internal IP. But the logs," she handed me a printed sheet, "they've been cleaned too perfectly. It's like someone wanted us to find them but not actually see anything." I scanned the sheet. The signatures were too neat, too orchestrated, like someone forging handwriting by tracing over it. "I think someone is trying to make it look like you accessed restricted servers," Priya said. "But it's not your key, I swear." I checked. I exhaled slowly. "So, someone's framing me," Priya swallowed. "Izzy, this feels big, like someone wants you to take the fall." Her words echoed the anonymous email from earlier, and a cold wave washed over me. "Keep digging," I said, but quietly. By evening, I forced myself to attend the weekly family dinner at my parents' home in Lake Oswego, a mansion with white columns, reflective floors, and an atmosphere so formal it made my skin itch. My mother opened the door wearing pearls. My father was already seated at the head of the table, swirling a glass of wine. Chloe strutted in 10 minutes late, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car. Dinner started with commentary about the real estate market, my father's favorite pastime. Then my mother asked, "Isabella dear, your company is stable, isn't it?" Before I could answer, Chloe chimed in, "Stable, Mom. It's practically a sinking ship. Everyone knows that." My mother frowned, but not at Chloe, at me. "Is that true?" I tried to stay calm. "We're dealing with a data issue. It's under investigation." My father sniffed. "I always said cybersecurity was an unpredictable field. You should have joined the family business. Stability matters." By family business, he meant a real estate firm he ran with Chloe's constant presence and my mother's constant approval. "It's not that simple," I said quietly. Chloe smirked. "Well, let's just hope nothing unexpected happens. Wouldn't want the Reyes name dragged through the mud." She said it so casually that for a moment I wondered if she knew the future before I did. After dinner, things got stranger. When I walked to the parking garage beneath the house, a man in a dark suit stood next to my SUV. He wasn't familiar. He wasn't smiling. "You're Isabella Reyes," he said. It wasn't a question. I stiffened. "Who are you?" He stepped closer, speaking low. "A word of advice. Stop poking around the wrong systems. Some people are getting impatient." My heart slammed in my chest. "Who sent you?" He said nothing. He just slid into a black sedan and drove away. When I finally made it home that night, Maya ran to me from the living room and hugged my waist. Her warmth grounded me. But the moment I opened my laptop, my breath caught. A duplicate of our internal logs was sitting on my desktop. I didn't put it there. I didn't know how it got there. And when I opened it, my name appeared in 3 places I had never touched, like someone had constructed a digital map pointing directly at me. My pulse thudded, and I tried calling Priya again, but my phone glitched. The line buzzed, then cut out completely. As I walked Maya to bed, trying to keep my hands from shaking, I found a new envelope shoved through the mail slot. Inside was a single line typed in bold black letters: "If Novigrad falls, your family falls first." I dropped onto the couch, clutching the note. I thought about Chloe saying, "If Dad knew what I know." I thought about the man in the garage. I thought about the forged logs. I thought about the anonymous email. For the first time, the possibility that my family might be tangled in something dangerous crept into my mind and refused to leave. Then the final blow hit. My lawyer called after 10 at night, voice tight. Apex filed suit. They want a criminal investigation. There's a subpoena with your name on it. They're accusing you of stealing company secrets. I closed my eyes as the world tilted. Just before midnight, a message flashed on my phone from an unknown number. "The family you trust is the one who started the fire." Something inside me cracked open then. Fear, grief, disbelief, all of it swirled into a single truth. Someone close to me wasn't just watching me fall, they were helping to push. The conference room felt colder than it should have, even with the heater humming beneath the table. I sat across from the attorneys at Reeves and Dalton Law, my hands locked together so tightly my knuckles ached. They'd called an emergency meeting at dawn, telling me to come immediately and discreetly. That phrase alone had kept my stomach twisted all the way there. But nothing prepared me for the stack of printed accusations spread across the polished wood between us. Apex Data Systems had filed a lawsuit against me personally, alleging theft of proprietary code, manipulation of offshore transfers, and falsification of cybersecurity logs. Each claim was more absurd than the last, but the attorneys didn't look amused or incredulous. They looked afraid. One of them pushed a sheet toward me. "This email," he said, "was sent from your account." I scanned the words. It wasn't my writing style. It wasn't my tone. But one detail punched the air out of me. The phrasing was identical to something Chloe had once said, a particular way she used commas and spacing. For a split second, the room tilted, and I wondered if I was imagining the resemblance. I blinked, forcing myself to breathe. No, it couldn't be. She wouldn't. The attorney cleared his throat. "Apex claims this message proves you offered them source code privately." "Offered," I whispered. "Why would I hand over the thing I built?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The weight of the accusation was suffocating enough. By the time I returned to Novigrad for an emergency team meeting, whispers were already snaking through the hallways. Half of my engineers watched me with fear. The others avoided my gaze as if proximity alone might ruin them. My CTO, a man I'd trusted for 5 years, stood apart from the crowd. He didn't even pretend to be confident. "We can't defend you," he said softly. "Not with logs this clean. Whoever forged them knew what they were doing." The room went so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. One of the younger analysts, Olivia, hovered by the door, twisting her ID badge nervously. When the meeting ended, she tugged my sleeve. "Miss Reyes, please talk to your sister." My eyebrows shot up. What? Olivia lowered her voice. "I overheard someone yesterday. They said Chloe's been networking with people from Apex, at brand events, private dinners, that kind of thing." A coldness slid down my spine. I wanted to dismiss it, but the memory of the forged email flashed hot and nauseating through my mind. I swallowed the rising dread and told Olivia to get home safe. After leaving the office, I drove straight to the townhouse I still had, at least until foreclosure finalized. Ethan was already there, leaning on the counter with a stack of papers. My ex-husband looked tired, irritated, and impatient all at once. "I heard the news," he said without greeting. "This is going to affect custody." I felt the words like a punch. Ethan, I didn't do anything. I'm being set up, he sighed. You expect me to risk Maya's safety based on hope the media says you're under investigation. The school board called me. They're talking about background checks. My throat tightened. Please don't do this right now. He slid a document toward me. This extends my custodial decision rights just until you're stable again. Stable, my entire world was crumbling, and he wanted paperwork signed. I pushed it back. I'm not signing anything. I can protect her. Ethan's expression turned sharp. Can you? Because it looks like your whole life is burning down. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Before leaving, he paused at the door. And, Izzy? Are you absolutely certain Chloe isn't involved? I saw she follows some Apex execs on social media. He closed the door before I could answer. The rest of the day blurred into exhaustion. I drove to my parents' house in Lake Oswego, hoping desperately that I might find support there. Maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe they'd stop Chloe from crowing about my failures for 5 minutes. Maybe they'd remember I was still their daughter. But when my mother opened the door, her lips were already pressed into a thin, disapproving line. You need to fix this mess immediately, she said. The neighbors are talking. My father didn't even invite me in. He stood near the foyer table, arms folded. Your sister warned us, he said. She told us your company was unstable. Chloe warned them. My vision darkened around the edges. Dad, I whispered, I'm being framed. We cannot be associated with criminal behavior, my mother snapped. Do not drag this family down with you. I stared at both of them, speechless. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask about Maya. They didn't even ask what I needed. They just wanted distance. As I turned to leave, my mother's voice drifted from behind me, sharp, hushed, speaking to someone on the phone. Yes, Chloe. She came here. No, she didn't suspect anything. That night, of course I won't mention it. A chill ran across my skin. What night? By the time I reached the street, tears blurred the windshield. I tried driving back to the townhouse, but halfway there, a gray sedan pulled up beside me and honked until I stopped. A man stepped out, the same one from the garage at my parents' place. He leaned toward my window. Careful what you're trying to uncover, he whispered. This isn't about code or Apex. This is bigger. People like you don't survive when they dig too deep. Then he walked away, disappearing into a side street like smoke. That evening, as I packed more of my belongings into storage boxes, my phone pinged with a notification: Subpoena issued, Novogorod investigation. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the kitchen counter for balance. It was happening. They were coming after everything: my name, my work, my livelihood. Then, as if the universe wanted to make sure I broke completely, my email inbox flooded with a new wave of headlines: CEO under investigation for corporate espionage, Novogorod data theft evidence mounts against founder, Isabella Reyes, the cybersecurity shame of Oregon. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail transcription popped up from an investor. You're toxic, don't contact me again. Later that night, as I sat on the edge of Maya's bed, rubbing her back while she slept, I heard the soft rustle of paper at my front door. I walked over and found another note slipped under the crack. This one held only 8 words. The family you trust is the family who betrayed you. The handwriting was neat, feminine, familiar. I stood, frozen fingers trembling as the truth pressed in from all sides. Someone close to me, closer than I ever imagined, was tearing my world apart from the inside. The storage unit smelled like cold metal and cardboard, and the fluorescent light above me flickered in an almost haunting rhythm. I stacked the last box against the wall, labeled kitchen, Maya's in rushed black marker, when my phone buzzed again. Another headline, another notification. Another reminder that my life was dissolving faster than I could save it. I shoved the phone into my pocket, not wanting to see my name, paired with words like fraud, criminal investigation, or cybersecurity disgrace one more time. Then I heard a small cough behind me. Maya stood there in her unicorn pajamas, hugging her stuffed rabbit, her cheeks pink from fever but stubbornly awake. Mama, she said softly, can I sleep in the car? It's cold here. Her words sliced straight through me. We had a townhouse, technically, but the heat had been turned off that morning, and a new foreclosure notice was taped to the door. The garage was colder than the living room, and boxes took up every inch of floor space. I knelt beside her and tucked her hair behind her ear. "We're going home soon, baby," I whispered. Though home felt like a concept I was quickly running out of. As we stepped into the icy evening air, the metallic bang of the storage unit door rolling shut echoed behind us. Maya leaned against my leg as we walked to the car. Even the soft click of the automatic lock felt too loud in the empty lot. Once she was settled in the back seat under her blanket, I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. I was shaking without realizing it. Exhaustion, fear, hunger, they'd all blended into the same dull ache. And then the garage door of the storage complex rolled up behind us. A sleek red BMW pulled inside. My pulse quickened. No one else was supposed to be here this late. The driver stepped out, a woman in heeled boots and a long coat. Her blonde hair caught the yellow light. Chloe, my sister. Her smirk was already formed before she reached my window. "Well," she said, tapping her manicured fingernail against the glass, "Mom wasn't exaggerating. You really are living like this." I opened the door, slowly, careful not to wake Maya. "What do you want to see the show in person?" She folded her arms, eyes glinting. "I mean, Izzy, come on. You always pretended to be the golden child, the ethical one, the genius." She clicked her tongue. "Turns out you're just another cautionary tale." Heat surged up my throat. "Chloe, someone is framing me." "Oh, I know," she said sweetly. "I've been following it closely." I froze. Following it, she smiled wider. "It's fascinating how perfect the evidence is. Almost elegant." Her gaze sharpened. "You always underestimated me." Something in her voice made my stomach twist. "You think I did this. I think you're unraveling," she replied calmly. "And when you unravel, you ruin everything around you. Just ask Ethan." She glanced at the back seat. My fists clenched. "Leave Maya out of this." "Why?" Chloe laughed softly. "You think she's not part of the story? Her mother's scandal is all over the news. Kids at her school are already whispering." The blood in my veins turned to ice. "How would you know what kids are whispering?" "Oh, Izzy, please." She stepped back. "I know more than you think." I stared at her. "What did you tell Mom about me?" She tilted her head, pretending to think. Only what she needed to hear. That your company was built on unstable contracts, that your employees were fleeing because of your unethical decisions, and that Apex had enough evidence to bury you. My breath caught. Those exact talking points appeared in press leaks the next day. "My sister, my own sister." "Why?" I whispered. My voice cracked in the cold air. "Why would you do this to me?" She leaned in closer, her perfume too sweet, too familiar. "Because I'm tired of you being the one people point to. The successful one. The accomplished one." She straightened her coat collar. "People finally see you for what you are." I stepped toward her. "You forged those emails, didn't you? You copied my writing patterns. You mimicked my coding logs. I don't have to admit anything." She cut in. "The world already believes it." I felt dizzy. And then her expression changed subtly but unmistakably into something darker. "And Izzy, if I were you, I'd stop digging." She tapped her own temple. "You're not built for war, little sister." She turned and slid into her BMW, the engine purring to life with a smug growl. She didn't look back as she drove away. I stood there shaking until the taillights disappeared into the night. That's when Maya whimpered in her sleep, coughing with a dry, painful sound. I climbed into the driver's seat. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, reaching back to touch her forehead. Too warm. Too warm again. I needed somewhere, anywhere. Warm for her to sleep. But my cards were maxed out. My accounts were frozen. The townhouse was unlivable. I was running out of places to go. When we finally arrived back at the freezing garage attached to the townhouse, I carried her inside. The concrete floor sucked warmth from the air. I wrapped her in every blanket we owned. then used the car heater one last time until the fuel light blinked. I sat beside her on the old couch. We'd dragged into the garage, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the siding. She coughed again, a raspy, painful sound. My throat burned. "I'm sorry," I breathed into the darkness. "I'm so sorry." A sudden knock at the garage door made me jump. It wasn't Chloe this time. When I opened the side entrance, I found a woman in a navy coat holding a sealed envelope. "Isabella Reyes?" she asked. "Yes." She handed me the envelope. "This was instructed to be delivered tonight. I can't say more." Then she left. Inside the envelope was a business card from a law firm. I didn't know Hensley and Cross, and a handwritten note, "Miss Reyes. We represent the estate of Mr. Aldrich Hale. Please come to our office at 1:00 a.m. tomorrow. This concerns a matter of urgent inheritance." Aldrich Hale. The name tugged at a memory buried far back. A night on a mountain road, a car engulfed in flames, a man I'd dragged out of a wreck before it exploded. 12 years ago. My breath caught. Maya coughed again, and I gathered her into my arms. I didn't know what the meeting meant. I didn't know why a billionaire I barely remembered would send for me. But for the first time in months, hope cracked through the darkness. The receptionist at Hensley and Cross barely looked up when I stepped into the marble-lined lobby holding Maya's hand and trying to look like a woman who still belonged in a place like this. My coat was borrowed from a donation box at the shelter. My shoes were scuffed. My hair was pulled into a tight ponytail to hide how desperately I needed sleep. But the receptionist's eyes flicked upward, and something changed. Recognition, pity, suspicion, I couldn't tell. "Isabella Reyes?" she asked. "Yes. Mr. Cross will see you now. Please follow me." I swallowed hard and lifted Maya into my arms. She nestled against me, still pale from her fever, but steady on her breathing after the clinic visit I could barely afford. The receptionist led us through a corridor lined with framed legal awards and oil paintings that looked older than my entire family line. At the end of the hall stood a dark wooden door. She opened it gently. "Go right in." Inside, everything felt quiet, heavy. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, polished so perfectly I could see our reflections in them. Behind an enormous desk sat a tall, silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses and eyes so sharp I felt dissected before he even spoke. "Miss Reyes," he greeted, rising to shake my hand. "I'm Nathaniel Cross. Please sit." I hesitated but took the offered seat. Maya curled into my lap, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Cross folded his hands. "I appreciate you coming on such short notice. I imagine things are difficult for you right now." Difficult didn't begin to cover it, but I stayed silent. He pulled a thick file from his drawer and set it on the desk. "I represent the estate of Mr. Aldrich Hale. I believe you're familiar with the name." My heart thudded. "I haven't heard it in years." His gaze sharpened. "But you remember." I nodded once. The memory rushed in like a flash flood rain on Highway 17. The twisted metal, the flames lighting the dark, the unconscious man in the crushed driver's seat. Me 22, terrified, using a tire iron to smash the window and drag him out before the car exploded. I'd taken him 30 feet away. I'd stayed until I heard sirens. I'd left before they arrived because I was late for a final project review at the job I desperately needed. He'd never known my name. Until now. How did he find me?" My voice cracked despite my best efforts. Cross opened the file. Mr. Hale had private investigators track down the woman who saved him. They never found you until recently. My stomach tightened. "Because of the Apex scandal." "Yes." He didn't sugarcoat it. "Your name appeared in public filings. Mr. Hale recognized the details in the crash record. He requested a full investigation into you personally, and when he realized who you were, he took immediate action." Cross leaned forward. "Miss Reyes, Mr. Hale passed away 3 weeks ago. The words landed like a blow. I had saved his life. I hadn't known he was dying. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He left a will, a very unusual will. Cross paused, measuring my expression, maybe my morality. "And his final instructions concern you." My chest tightened. Meanwhile, Cross opened the file. Inside were pages and pages of typed legal text estates, holdings trustees' clauses, but one single sheet rested on top, handwritten in a shaky but elegant script. "For Miss Isabella Reyes." My breath froze. Cross began reading from a printed copy. "To the woman who pulled me from fire and vanished before I could thank her, all that I built is hers." The room went silent. I blinked. "I'm sorry," what Cross continued calmly. "She saved my life without asking for anything. So I leave her everything. My home, my shares, my private accounts, and the full controlling interest in Hale Technologies." I felt the world tilt under me. Hale Technologies, one of the largest private logistics and data routing empires on the West Coast. Not startup level, not regional, an empire. Cross slid another paper across the desk, a condensed summary. The first number had 9 zeros. I nearly dropped it. "This has to be a mistake," I whispered. "It isn't," Cross said gently. I can't accept this. I don't even know how to run a company like that anymore. My own business collapsed. My parents, my sister, everyone thinks I'm a fraud. That is precisely why Mr. Hale chose you," Cross replied. His exact words. "She did the right thing when no one was watching. She'll do the right thing when the world is." My throat tightened painfully. Cross wasn't finished. "Mr. Hale also left a secondary directive." He opened a sealed envelope with a red wax stamp. "This is to be given to you only if you accept the inheritance." Inside is a personal letter and a file he said would change everything she thinks she knows about loyalty. A chill rippled through me. Change everything about what he didn't say. Only that the file contains sensitive information regarding individuals connected to your past. I hated the way the hairs on my arms rose. "Miss Reyes," Cross said quietly, "your presence here today is considered a preliminary acceptance. If you wish to decline, I must be informed before the probate hearing next week." I stared at him. Why would someone like Aldrich Hale choose me? There must be someone else. Family, a partner, a child. Cross shook his head. Mr. Hale had no spouse, no children, and he was estranged from distant relatives. His board expected him to appoint a successor from within the company. He looked at me steadily. "Instead, he chose you." Maya stirred slightly, leaning her head against my chest. Her breathing was soft, now steady. She was warm again. Safe. Last night she'd been trembling with fever in a freezing garage. The contrast made my lungs tighten. Cross softened his tone. "You're not obligated to accept. But understand, Mr. Hale. Set this up with intention. He wanted to change the trajectory of your life." My fingers trembled as I set the summary down. Why now? Why not 10 years ago? Why wait until I'm being dragged through the mud? Cross hesitated only a moment, but it was enough for fear to pool in my stomach. Because he said quietly, "Your downfall raised alarms he had placed years ago. And when they activated, he knew someone was targeting you." I froze. "Targeting me?" How Cross closed the file. "Miss Reyes, I do not have clearance to disclose the contents of the secondary directive. Only that Mr. Hale believed someone was orchestrating attacks against both you and him. He wanted the truth to be in your hands." The room felt suddenly smaller. My parents' cold dismissal. My sister's perfectly timed cruelty. Apex's fabricated evidence. The sudden wave of press leaks. All of it flickered across my mind like puzzle pieces snapping into place. "Someone framed me," I whispered. Cross nodded. "According to Mr. Hale, yes." My pulse pounded. "Do you know who? No?" But he believed you would understand when you read what he left behind. I looked down at Maya curled safely in my lap, and I made a choice. Not because I wanted wealth, not because I craved power, Not because I deserved any of it, but because I would never again let anyone endanger my daughter's life. I looked up at Nathaniel Cross. I accept. He nodded slowly, almost solemnly. Then there is one more thing you should know. What? The primary beneficiary listed before you, he said. Sliding another page out of the file has already taken legal action to challenge the will. I froze. Primary beneficiary Cross met my eyes. A woman named Serena Hale, Mr. Hale's niece. The name hit me like a slap. Serena, Chloe's closest confidant, the one she talked about constantly, the one who always understood family politics. Cross continued. She has already filed an injunction claiming undue influence, mental incompetence, and manipulation on your part. My mouth went dry. She filed it before she even met me, yes, meaning she'd been preparing for this. Preparing to stop me, or to get something Mr. Hale didn't give her. I swallowed hard. What does she want? Cross's voice dropped. Everything. Serena Hale arrived at my townhouse before I even had time to process what accepting the inheritance meant. It was the next morning, barely 9, the skies still pale with winter light, when a knock rattled the thin front door hard enough to make Maya flinch. I opened it cautiously. There she was, Serena. Tall, ice-blonde hair cut in a severe bob, dressed in a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than my first car. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited, her sharp heels clicking across my worn wooden floor. Her gaze swept across the cramped living room, the sagging couch, the peeling paint, the cold air you could still see your breath in. Then she smiled. "Oh," she murmured, "you really are broke." Her voice was velvet over steel. I shut the door behind her, my hand tightening on the knob. "What do you want?" She turned to me, tilting her head as if examining a specimen in a lab. "I think you know. I don't. You accepted the will." Her smile dropped. "You shouldn't have." I crossed my arms. "It wasn't up to you." She took 2 steps closer, invading my space. "Everything concerning my uncle is up to me. He didn't think so." Serena's jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed cold and calculating. "He wasn't in his right mind," she said softly. "He was dying, drugged, lonely, vulnerable." Her gaze flicked down at my thrift store coat. "And you, being the opportunist you apparently are, swooped in right before the end." My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. "I never met your uncle until days ago." "Yes," Serena said with a chilling calm, "that's the problem. You were a nobody before this, a walking scandal. A bankrupt fraud who suddenly gets handed controlling interest of a multi-billion-dollar empire." She lifted her brows. "Forgive me for not buying this fairy tale." I clenched my jaw. "I saved his life." 12 years ago, she scoffed. "Convenient story. No witnesses, no photos, no record. Just a heroic moment you conveniently remembered." My hands curled into fists. "I didn't come forward because I didn't want credit or attention." "No." Her smile was razor thin. "You didn't come forward because it never happened." Anger shot through me so hot it nearly made me dizzy. "You don't know a thing about me." "Oh, but I do," Serena murmured. She reached into her coat and pulled out a stack of papers, a thick sheath of printed articles, screenshots, leaked emails, and legal documents. All of them about me. My collapse. The Apex scandal. Every accusation. Every humiliating headline. Every lie someone had planted. "You're a walking liability," Serena said. "And you think you can run Hale Technologies. You think shareholders will trust you. You think the board will accept you." She leaned in, her perfume sharp and expensive. "They won't." I lifted my chin. "His will was legally executed, and it will legally be destroyed." My chest tightened. "You can't undo a valid will." She smiled like she'd been waiting for that line. "Watch me." I stared at her. "Why are you doing this? You clearly have money." "Money." Her voice cracked with a sudden sharp bitterness. "This isn't about money. This is about legacy. Blood. My uncle built something extraordinary. It belongs with me, not with the woman who tanked her own company and dragged her family's name through the mud. A beat. Then she said quietly, "I've been preparing for this for months." A cold chill crept down my spine. "Months," I repeated slowly. Serena's smile was silent confirmation. That wasn't possible. Unless she knew about me before Aldrich's announcement, before the lawyers found me, before the will was read, unless she'd been watching me fall apart. My breath hitched. "What did you do?" She didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, she said, "Withdraw from the inheritance hearing. Sign your refusal. I'll make sure the press frames you as gracious, selfless, smart enough to avoid another scandal. And if I don't," her eyes gleamed, "then you'll regret it." We stared at each other in the cold silence of the living room. Her threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Maya slipped into the room, suddenly rubbing her eyes. "Mama, I'm thirsty." Serena's gaze snapped to her. Then she smiled, slowly, cruelly. "Oh," she whispered. "So that's the child. The one the ER turned away." I stepped between them so fast Serena blinked. "Leave her out of this." "Why?" Serena asked lightly. "Children are part of the story too. Public sympathy, media optics. Mothers make compelling villains. Every instinct in me screamed to get her out. "Get out of my house," I said, voice low and shaking. She didn't move. She studied me like a challenge she was eager to win. "I'll give you 24 hours, she said finally. "Decline the inheritance, sign the refusal, or I file the appeal and burn you publicly again." She touched the edge of my coat lightly, like brushing dust off a forgotten artifact. "And trust me, Isabella, this time I won't miss." She turned toward the door, but before walking out, she paused and said over her shoulder, "Apex was just the beginning." The door shut behind her. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt rooted to the floor, frozen by shock, and the terrible realization that something much larger than me was unfolding, and that Serena was connected to the very forces that had destroyed my life months earlier. Maya tugged our blanket around her shoulders. "Mama, who was that lady?" I knelt and hugged her tightly. "Nobody we need to worry about right now." But we did. Serena was not bluffing, and she had resources I couldn't begin to match. That night, after Maya fell asleep in my arms on the couch, I sat alone in the dark living room, staring at the papers Serena had left behind. Every article, every accusation, every lie that had broken my life apart. My sister Chloe's sneering face flickered through my mind. Her tone, her timing, her offhand knowledge of details she shouldn't have known, and Serena's words rang in my skull. "I've been preparing for this for months." 2 women, 2 families, 2 motives converging. And I suddenly realized Serena Hale and Chloe Reyes were friends. Not just friends, collaborators, partners. My hands trembled violently. My fall wasn't random, it wasn't accidental, it wasn't bad luck. It was engineered. And now the person who might know the truth, the person Aldrich Hale trusted, was lying in an estate house hours away. A letter waited. A file waited. The truth waited. I stood up, grabbed the keys to the old SUV, and wrapped Maya in her thickest blanket. We were leaving tonight, because I was done being hunted. It was time to learn why Aldrich Hale believed my downfall was not an accident, and why he thought the truth would destroy everything I thought I knew about my own blood. The storm rolled in faster than the weather app predicted. By the time Maya and I reached the coast highway, the sky had turned into a heaving wall of gray, and the rain hammered the windshield like stones. The wipers squealed pathetically across the glass, doing almost nothing to cut through the blur of water. Maya slept in the back seat, curled beneath her blanket, her cheek pressed against her stuffed rabbit. Each tiny breath she took grounded me, pushed me forward. I kept repeating one truth in my head like a mantra, something to outrun the fear clawing at me. Aldrich Hale left answers. And I needed them now. The Hale estate sat on a cliffside outside Pacific Grove. far from any main road, hidden behind old pine trees and stone walls. By the time I reached the winding private drive, my hands were cramping from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. The iron gates loomed tall, severe, ancient-looking. I leaned out the window and buzzed the intercom. "It's Isabella Reyes," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Mr. Cross sent me." There was a long pause, long enough for the rain to start dripping down the back of my neck. Then the speaker crackled. "Proceed." The gates opened slowly, like a giant's jaw unclenching. I drove up the hill until a massive stone mansion appeared, warm golden light glowing from its windows despite the storm raging around it. The moment I parked, the front door swung open. Nina stood there, Hale's housekeeper. Tall, composed, her silver-braided hair pulled back in a knot, her expression unreadable even in the sheets of rain. I carried Maya out of the car and rushed toward the entrance. Nina stepped aside, letting me in. "You should have called ahead," she said calmly, shutting the door behind us. "The roads are dangerous. I didn't want to waste time." My voice came out breathless. I need to see what he left for me, the letter, the file." Her eyes flicked to Maya, first softening with concern. "The child is feverish again." "She's okay," I said, adjusting the blanket around her. "She just needs rest." Nina nodded once. "Follow me. I'll show you the room Mr. Hale prepared." She led us down a long, quiet hallway, lined with old portraits and framed maps of trade routes. Every detail of the place felt curated, heavy with history. Maya's breathing warmed against my shoulder as we walked deeper inside. Nina opened a door near the end of the hall. Inside was a guest suite larger than my entire townhouse, pale gray walls, plush carpeting, soft lamplight, and a canopied bed piled with warm blankets. "Lay the child down," Nina said, already adjusting pillows. "I'll bring water and fever-reducing medicine." I placed Maya onto the bed. She stirred, but didn't fully wake. I brushed her damp curls back and tucked her in my chest, tightening with gratitude and fear at the same time. When I stepped back into the hallway, Nina was waiting. "You're here for the letter," she said. Not a question. "Yes," she gave a shallow nod. "Then you'll come with me." The walk to Aldrich Hale's study felt like descending into another world. The storm shaking the windows, the dim sconces casting long shadows along the corridor, the silence so deep it felt like pressure against my ears. Inside the study, a single green-shaded lamp glowed over the massive oak desk. Papers were organized in perfect stacks. The air smelled faintly of leather and old books. And there in the center of the desk, the sealed envelope. A thick, cream-colored envelope with a wax seal in a deep blood red. For Isabella Reyes, and only her. My hands shook as I reached for it. Nina didn't move. She watched me with the quiet intensity of someone who'd been waiting for this moment too. I slid my nail under the wax seal and broke it cleanly. Inside were 2 items: a handwritten letter several pages long, and a black folder with no markings. The folder felt heavier than paper should. I opened the letter first. The ink was uneven, as if written with a trembling hand. "Isabella, if you are reading this, I am gone. And you are in danger, though perhaps not from where you expect." My pulse climbed into my throat. I skimmed further, faster. "I know about the Apex sabotage. I know it was no coincidence. I know who orchestrated your downfall." I froze. He knew, he'd known everything. I forced myself to keep reading. "The same people who tried to destroy you also tried to destroy me. More than once. They want what I built, and they are willing to commit crimes to get it. You were collateral damage because you were connected to me without knowing it." The knowledge slammed into me like a blow. Connected to him? Why? I read on. "When you pulled me from that burning car 12 years ago, you saved more than my life. You interrupted an assassination attempt. And the men responsible for that crash have never stopped circling because they never knew who disrupted their plan. Until now." My breath shortened. Someone had tried to kill him. Someone had paid for it. And he believed that same network had come for me. I flipped to the next page. Your sister. Your parents. Your business collapse. The fabricated evidence, apex, all threads in the same tapestry. The room seemed to tilt. I forced myself to stay still. My sister, my parents, no. No, he had to be wrong. But his next line shattered me. Those closest to you are not always your allies. Some are simply waiting for the right time to strike. My hands began to shake violently. No, I whispered. Not my family. They wouldn't. But deep down, a terrible memory surfaced. Chloe's words in the storage lot. You always underestimated me. Your downfall is fascinating. I know more than you think. I kept reading. I could not expose these people in time. My illness took the last opportunity from me. But you, if you choose, may finish what I could not. I have left you the evidence they feared most. And that was when I finally opened the black folder. Inside were financial records, shell company documents, email transcripts, annotated notes in Aldrich's handwriting, photographs, signatures, contracts, and a timeline, all leading to two names. My heart stopped. They were my parents. I stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. No, I whispered. No, that can't be right. The air around me shifted. I hadn't even noticed Nina move closer, but when I looked at her, her face wasn't surprised. She already knew. Not the details, but enough to believe it. Miss Reyes, she said quietly. Aldrich often warned that the greatest betrayals do not come from enemies. They come from family. My knees nearly gave out. Betrayals, family, money, power, apex. My sister's vicious smirk. My parents' cold dismissal. The speed with which they sided against me. The way the evidence against me was too perfect. The truth was dawning fast, razor sharp and horrifying. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd helped destroy me. I pressed a shaking hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. Maya was just down the hall. She didn't need to wake to this nightmare. I turned to the last page of Aldrich's letter. You now have a choice, justice or silence, forgiveness or truth. But be warned, once you uncover everything, there is no path back to who you were before. Outside, a loud crack split the air, lightning hitting somewhere close to the cliff. I closed the letter, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. Everything was different now. Everyone was different. And the quiet life I thought I was rebuilding had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. Nina stepped toward me carefully. Miss Reyes, what will you do now? I clutched the folder to my chest, steadying myself. I'm going to finish what Aldrich started. My voice was soft but unshakable. And I'm going to find out exactly what my family did to him and to me. The storm eased by morning, leaving the Hale estate wrapped in a pale gray fog that clung to the cliffside like a living thing. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, Aldrich's letter resurfaced, those terrible words, those impossible accusations. By dawn, the black folder felt like a living weight in my hands. Maya was still sleeping deeply when Nina brought in a tray of toast fruit and warm tea. Even in my shock, the sight of my daughter tucked safely under layers of soft blankets steadied me. For a moment, I allowed myself to watch her breathe. Then I stepped out of the room and quietly closed the door behind me. My life outside this estate was collapsing like a dying star, but here I had a chance to fight. And I wasn't going to waste it. Nina was waiting in the hallway. Mr. Cross will join you shortly, she said. He's reviewing the documents you provided. You showed him the file. My chest tightened. Only what you permitted. Her gaze softened. He is alarmed. Alarmed felt like an understatement. If Aldrich Hale, a billionaire with limitless resources, couldn't dismantle the people who orchestrated a corporate assassination attempt, then what chance did I have? But Avery Hale didn't choose me because I was the strongest. He chose me because I had nothing left to lose. I followed Nina to the small sitting room overlooking the cliffs. Fog swallowed the ocean below, so dense it looked like the world ended right beneath the windowsill. I sat on the tufted chair, clutching the folder, and waited. Footsteps approached. Nathaniel Cross entered the room carrying a leather briefcase. His expression was harder today, sharpened as if he'd aged years overnight. "Miss Reyes," he said, taking the seat across from me. "I've examined the documents." My heart slammed once, and he pressed his palms together. "These aren't fabrications, not even close. The signatures, the metadata on the files, the timestamps, they're all authentic." A tremor crept into my fingers. So, the same network that sabotaged Apex, they also tried to kill Aldrich, yes. Cross removed a printed page from his folder and slid it across the coffee table. "And if the timeline is correct, the earliest financial trails intersect with your father's shell companies almost 11 years ago." I stared at the names on the page. Rexfield Holdings, Portmere Equity, Crescent 9 LLC. All of them companies my parents handled for elite clients. My mother once joked that their real product was secrets. The memory stung like a fresh burn. "What about my sister?" I asked quietly. Cross paused. "Her name doesn't appear directly in the financial transfers, but some communication logs reference a secondary operative who had close personal access to you." A chill ran through me. "Chloe." Cross's eyes were sympathetic but firm. "Your sister may have been a pawn. Or she may have been complicit." I swallowed hard. She bragged last week that she knew what kids at Maya's school were whispering. She shouldn't have known that. Cross leaned in slightly. "Did she say how she knew?" I shook my head. "No. But Serena. She hinted that she and Chloe had been preparing for something for months." Cross's brows lifted. "Serena Hale and your sister know each other. They're close friends." I felt sick saying it aloud. "Always have been." Cross exhaled slowly, the weight of realization settling across his features. "That explains far too much." Before I could ask what he meant, Ethan Aldrich's former head of security entered the room. He was a heavy-set man with a tightly cropped beard and eyes that scanned every corner automatically. "Miss Reyes," he said respectfully. "Mr. Cross briefed me. I'm here to ensure your safety." My safety? My pulse kicked. Is someone coming for me? Ethan didn't soften the truth. "If your family is involved in the same network that targeted Mr. Hale, they'll know by now that his evidence is missing, meaning they'd know I had it." Cross spoke carefully. "We believe the contents of that folder were the primary reason Mr. Hale was targeted repeatedly. Whoever orchestrated the sabotage wanted his silence. They'll want yours." I gripped the armrest. Are you saying they might try to hurt me?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "Yes, or discredit you further, or pressure you into handing over control of Hale Technologies." "How?" I whispered. But I already knew. "Serena." Cross clasped his hands. "Serena Hale is likely fully aware that her uncle was gathering evidence. Her decision to challenge the will wasn't simply spite, it was strategy." "She tried to intimidate me," I murmured. "She told me to decline the inheritance, or she'd ruin me." "What exactly did she say?" Ethan asked. I repeated Serena's words. The threat. The icy certainty. The line she delivered like a dagger into my ribs' apex was just the beginning. Cross sat back slowly, his expression grim. "Then we're dealing with someone far more dangerous than a resentful heir." Something deep inside me cracked. A place I'd kept protected even through the foreclosure, the humiliation, the ER disaster. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why would my own family work with Serena? What would they gain by destroying everything I built?" Cross exchanged a glance with Ethan, and then he answered. "Hale Technologies was one of the biggest private obstacles to a planned acquisition involving certain financial groups your parents have represented. Groups with a vested interest in controlling the West Coast logistics and autonomous transport networks." "I don't understand." Cross steepled his fingers. "Your father wanted a portion of Hale Technologies for years. He attempted to acquire minority shares through shell corporations. Aldrich rejected every approach. Ethan finished the thought. So your father and others took the backdoor approach. Remove the owner, wait for chaos, and take the company in pieces. My entire body went cold. This can't be real, I rasped. My parents wouldn't do that. They wouldn't try to kill someone. But even as I said it, my voice cracked. Because I remembered the way they'd refused to help me. The way my mother said I brought shame. The way my father told me I was a liability. And the whole time, they'd been hiding something unforgivable. Cross's eyes softened. Miss Reyes, I don't expect you to accept it now, but the evidence is incontrovertible. Mr. Hale wasn't mistaken. The room swayed. I pressed a hand to my forehead, breathing through the shock. Ethan cleared his throat gently. There's something else. I looked up. He hesitated, never a good sign. One of the shell companies that funneled money into the assassination plot. His voice dropped a level. It was registered at an address connected to your family trust. For a moment I thought my heart actually stopped. My family trust, I whispered. Cross nodded gravely. The same trust that funded your education, the one your parents claimed came from old investments. It was likely funded through the same channels used to pay for the attempts on Mr. Hale's life. The taste in my mouth turned metallic. I pushed back my chair abruptly and stood pacing to the window where fog still blanketed the cliffs. The ocean sounded like a roar beneath the mist. They had used the same money that educated me, protected me, to pay for someone's murder, to frame me, to destroy my business, to leave Maya freezing in that garage. All of it tied to the same poison source. I lowered my head, gripping the windowsill so tightly my knuckles went white. Miss Reyes, Cross said softly, you don't have to carry this alone. Aldrich prepared support, legal teams, security, resources. Why me? I whispered again. Why not someone else? Cross's voice softened. Because you saved his life once, Ethan added quietly, and he believed you could save something much bigger now. I turned slowly. What Cross looked directly into my eyes. Hale Technologies, his legacy, the truth, and maybe yourself. The weight of those words settled around me, not crushing this time, but bracing me. I closed my eyes for one steadying breath. When I opened them, I felt a shift deep in my chest. A quiet, decisive click inside something that had been broken for too long. I need to confront them, I said, not Serena. Not yet, my family. Cross stood. Then we'll prepare. Ethan nodded once. You won't go alone. But I shook my head. No, I said. I need to see them myself. I need to look my parents in the eyes and hear them say what they've done. Ethan frowned. Miss Reyes. It's not about danger, I said quietly. It's about truth. Silence settled in the room. The fog outside shifted, revealing a glimpse of the churning ocean below, and I knew exactly what I had to do. Tomorrow I was going home. Tomorrow I would face the people who raised me and decide whether blood was something to save or something to finally irrevocably burn away. The gates of my parents' estate rose in front of me like a pair of iron jaws waiting to snap shut. I hadn't seen this house in months, not since the day they told me I'd ruined the family name and ordered me not to come back. Back then I'd been desperate, humiliated, begging. Today I wasn't begging. Today I was here for the truth. The SUV rumbled to a stop. Maya was safely at the Hale estate with Nina and a private nurse. Ethan had insisted on coming with me, but I made him stay out of sight down the hill. This part I had to do alone. I stepped out of the car and approached the intercom. My reflection stared back at me in the small metal plate hair, tied neatly, dark coat buttoned, shoulders squared. I didn't look like the broken woman who had once stood here. I pressed the button. It's Isabella. A long silence. Then the gate buzzed and swung inward. I exhaled once, slow and steady, and walked inside. The driveway curved through manicured hedges and impeccable lawns that had always felt more like a museum than a home. The stone facade of the mansion rose tall and cold, every window reflecting the pale winter light. My pulse thudded in my ears as the front door opened before I even reached it. My mother stood there perfectly groomed in a tailored cream pantsuit, her expression an unreadable mask. "I was told you were coming," she said. "I assumed it was a mistake." Her voice was brittle like porcelain ready to crack. "It wasn't," I replied quietly. She stepped aside reluctantly. "Well, come in." The foyer looked exactly as I remembered, spotless marble expensive art silence so thick it felt like it could choke you. My father appeared at the end of the hall, tall and sharp-featured, dressed in an immaculate dark suit, despite having nowhere to go. His eyes narrowed the instant he saw me. "What are you doing here, Isabella?" I took a breath. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to discuss, my father," said the words clipped. "You disgraced this family and we made our stance clear." I stepped forward. "Then you can make your stance clear again to my face." His jaw twitched at the challenge. My mother crossed her arms. "This attitude is exactly why I know what you did." The words sliced through the room like a blade. Her mouth snapped shut. My father's eyes sharpened with suspicion. "You know?" what he asked, voice dangerously low. I reached into my coat and pulled out the printed page I'd brought. Not the whole folder, not the worst of it, but enough. The shell company registration. The registered address tied directly to our family trust. I set it on the glass coffee table between us. My father's expression didn't break, but the flicker in his eye was unmistakable. "What is this?" he asked. "The beginning," I said softly. "Aldrich Hale found the money trail. He found shell corporations tied to you, to Mom, to investments routed through the trusts that paid for Stop." My mother's voice cracked like a whip. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes," I whispered. "I do." They said nothing. I pressed on. "He found evidence linking you to the sabotage of Hale Technologies. You attempted to force a takeover, and when Aldrich refused, you funded a so-called security operation that resulted in his brake lines being cut." My father's nostrils flared. "Enough." I raised my head, refusing to look away. "And when the assassination failed, when I saved him, you didn't stop. You went after him again. And again. And when you couldn't eliminate him, you dragged me into it." They stared at me. Silent. Terrifyingly silent. My voice trembled as I pushed forward. "You sabotaged Apex. You framed me. You planted the evidence that wiped out my company. You let me fall apart. You let me lose everything." My mother finally spoke, her tone soft but poisonous. "Isabella, you're letting grief and stress distort your memory. You were fired for misconduct. You failed your husband. You mismanaged your business. Mom, stop." She did. Slowly, she lowered her arms. My father stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You have always had a dramatic imagination. Hale Technologies was none of our concern." "You're lying," I whispered. He said nothing. "Why did you do it?" My voice cracked. "Why did you destroy me?" Still nothing. My hands tightened into fists. "Is it because I didn't join the firm? Because I didn't want your kind of business? Because I married someone you didn't approve of?" My father's jaw clenched. "Because you were sloppy." The words hit me harder than any slap could. "You were always too emotional," he continued coldly. "Too idealistic. You built a company based on ethics, not strategy. You refused contracts that could have positioned you as a major player." I stared at him, stunned. "So you punished me." He stepped closer. "I protected this family from your incompetence." My stomach turned. "You sabotaged your own daughter," I whispered. "Your flesh and blood." "Better one daughter ruined," he said, "than an entire legacy destroyed." My mother didn't argue. She didn't defend me. She simply watched. "You were collateral," my father added. "Nothing more." For a moment I couldn't breathe. He didn't even hide it. He didn't deny it. He didn't pretend remorse. He said it plainly, like a business decision. "You nearly killed a man," I whispered. "A man who never harmed you." "He stood in the way of a $6 billion restructuring deal," my father said. "He knew the risks." I shook my head, a laugh of disbelief breaking from me. "You're monsters. Grow up, Isabella." My mother's voice was low, dismissive. The world rewards strength. Aldrich played a game he couldn't finish. And you dragged me into your game without telling me, I said. My father raised a brow. We didn't drag you. You inserted yourself. You saved the wrong man. A tremor ran down my spine. Nothing personal, he added. Nothing personal. Destroying my life, leaving Maya freezing in a garage, letting me think I'd failed everyone. Not personal. I forced myself to breathe. Aldrich left his estate to me. Everything. And he gave me the evidence. That finally made my mother's face crack. Pure fear flickered through her eyes. My father recovered faster. You didn't read everything. I read enough. No. He stepped forward, intensity burning in his gaze. You don't understand what you're holding. That evidence implicates more than us. It implicates partners far more powerful than Hale. If you expose it, what I asked, they'll come after me. My father didn't answer. His silence was confirmation. They already did, I whispered. No denial, no defense, just an icy, terrifying truth settling over all three of us. My father exhaled slowly. You think we're your enemies, Isabella. But there are far worse people looking at you now. Something inside me hardened a quiet, fierce resolve. Then they can come, I said. I'm done being afraid. My mother finally broke. Isabella, listen to me. No, I said. You listen to me for once. I stepped back toward the door. When the time comes, you'll face what you've done. You won't hide behind power or influence. You won't hide through me, or Maya, or anyone else. I opened the door. My father's voice followed, low and chilling. You don't know what war you've started. I looked over my shoulder. No, I said. You don't know who you raised. And I walked out of the house, no longer a daughter begging for scraps, but a woman carrying the proof that could bring everything crashing down. The morning after confronting my parents, I woke to the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below the Hale estate, a slow and rhythmic pounding that felt like the world saying, there's no going back now. My hands still ached from how tightly I'd clutched the steering wheel the night before. My throat was raw, my body heavy. I'd thought facing them would bring relief, or clarity, or even grief. Instead, it brought something colder, something sharper, resolve. When I stepped out into the corridor, I found Ethan waiting for me with a cup of coffee, and a look that suggested he hadn't slept either. You left the estate last night without backup, he reminded me. That can't happen again. I didn't want anyone involved, I murmured. Ethan shook his head. It's too late for that. They know you have the evidence. They know Aldrich left everything to you, whatever lines they drew before they're gone now. His words rang like a warning bell. I glanced down the hallway toward Maya's room. Is she awake? She's with Nina in the greenhouse, he said gently. Breathing warm air. She's okay. Relief softened some of the tension in my body, but only briefly. Because just as I exhaled, Nathaniel Cross appeared at the other end of the hall, with a file tucked under his arm and urgency in his stride. Miss Reyes, he said, we need to talk. Now. We went to Aldrich's study, the same room where I'd broken the wax seal on the letter that had changed everything. Cross shut the door behind us. What happened with your parents, he asked. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him their answers, their deflections, their admissions without admitting. The coldness in my father's voice when he'd said I was collateral. The flicker of fear on my mother's face when I mentioned the evidence in my hands. Cross rubbed his temple. You confronted them directly with the shell companies, yes. And they didn't deny their involvement, no, he exhaled slowly. Then everything Aldrich suspected was correct. But we have a new problem. He opened his file and slid a paper toward me. A press release. Hale Technologies emergency board meeting scheduled, challenge to will under consideration. My stomach tightened. Serena Cross confirmed. She moved up her appeal. She's going public. And she's gathered support from 3 board members who were once close to your parents' investment group. Ethan frowned. They're trying to shove her into Aldrich's seat before probate is finalized. Exactly, Cross said. If she succeeds, she gains control of Hale Technologies before the will is honored. And she'll bury the evidence, I whispered. Along with you, Ethan added. Cross didn't disagree. We need to get ahead of this, he said. You must attend the board session. My heart stumbled. Me? In front of the entire board? I don't even know how to talk to corporate executives right now. They've all seen the headlines. They think I'm toxic. Cross's tone softened, but only slightly. The only way to counter Serena's narrative is to show up with your own. And say what I whispered. That the people trying to destroy Aldrich are the same people who happen to be my parents, that my sister is working with them, that the corporate sabotage, murder attempts, and takeover plots all lead back to my own blood. The room fell. Silent. Finally, Ethan said, You say the truth, a truth that could tear my entire world apart permanently. A truth that would put a target on my back so large even Aldrich's security team wouldn't be able to protect me forever. A truth that would put my parents in prison. I felt my fingers tremble. I curled them into fists. I need time to think. Cross and Ethan exchanged a look. You don't have time, Cross said quietly. The board meets tomorrow morning. The words hit like a punch. Tomorrow? I stood and stepped to the window, staring out at the fog that clung to the cliffs like a shroud. Below, waves crashed violently, as if trying to warn me of the danger ahead. I had always believed that family, even a broken one, could be repaired with enough effort. With apology. With empathy. With time. But there are fractures that run too deep, and truths that once unearthed cannot be buried again. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Nina entered holding a folded newspaper. You should see this, she said. She handed it to me. My name was on the front page, again. But this time it wasn't gossip. It was a hit piece. Local CO linked to illegal transfer of protected data sources. Claim billionaire benefactor manipulated at end of life below. It was a small picture of Serena Hale, leaving a courthouse with manufactured grief on her face, and the headline, Niece of late magnate, seeks to restore honor of Hale legacy. Cross muttered a curse under his breath. They're weaponizing the press. Ethan turned to me. This is a coordinated attack. They want to corner you, make you look unstable before the board meeting. I set the paper down with shaking hands. They're afraid, I whispered. Good, Ethan said. Fear means we're close to the truth. But the truth didn't comfort me. The truth terrified me. Because the more evidence I gathered, the more clearly I saw it. Serena wasn't just trying to steal the inheritance. She wasn't just trying to take Hale Technologies. She wasn't just punishing me. She was protecting someone. Someone powerful. Someone who didn't want Aldrich's investigation to come to light. My parents were part of something larger, a network of wealthy families and investors who had spent years weaving deals behind closed doors. And Aldrich Hale had threatened their control. I had become collateral because of him. And now I was a threat too. Cross stepped forward. There's more. Serena filed a petition claiming you coerced Miss Hale in his final days. That you exploited his vulnerability. My mouth dropped open. I wasn't even there. They don't need truth, Cross said evenly. They need doubt. Ethan crossed his arms. You go into that meeting tomorrow, you sit across from Serena, and you prove you're stronger than the narrative they've built. I looked at both men, then out at the churning sea. Then I need to see the rest of the folder. Both of them stilled. Are you sure? Cross asked. No, I admitted. But I need to know what I'm walking into. Nina silently crossed the room and retrieved the black folder from the locked cabinet Aldrich had custom-built for confidential files. She set it in my hands like she was handing me something sacred and deadly. I opened it. Page after page of evidence. Wire transfers, affidavits, recorded calls, dossiers, and finally a list. A list of individuals involved in the attempted takeover. At the top was the name I already knew, Rex Reyes. Below it, Camila Reyes. Below that, Serena Hale. And then, a name I didn't expect, David Hale, Serena's brother. The room tilted. I felt Cross's hands steady the back of my chair. They were all in on it, I whispered. Every one of them. Cross nodded gravely. And tomorrow, when you face the board, you'll be walking into a den of people who may already know you've uncovered them. A pulse of fear ricocheted through my chest. I'm not ready, I whispered. Ethan shook his head. You're more ready than you think. I closed the folder, and something inside me settled. The fear didn't disappear. The grief didn't lessen. But something sharper, something stronger rose above the noise. I'll go to the board meeting, I said, but not to defend myself. Ethan lifted a brow. Then, for what I met his eyes, to expose them, Cross exhaled. Then we prepare. Nina nodded silently. And as the storm clouds rolled in again outside, I realized something with a clarity that left me breathless. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just be fighting for Hale Technologies. I'd be fighting for my life. The Callaway Transit Group headquarters rose above Portland like a glass and steel monolith, cold and gleaming in the early morning light. I stood at the base of it, watching the reflections of passing clouds ripple across its surface, and felt the weight of everything I carried pressing into my ribcage, the folder, the evidence, the truth Aldrich Hale died trying to reveal. Ethan stood beside me, eyes sweeping the perimeter. The press is already here. They know Serena called an emergency session, I figured. You sure you want to walk through the front? Yes. My voice was steady. If Serena wants a show, she'll get one. As we approached the revolving doors, cameras exploded in a frenzy of flashes. Isabella, did you manipulate Aldrich Hale? Is it true you're under criminal investigation? Are you being removed as beneficiary? Did you coerce a dying man for his fortune? Ethan stepped between me and the reporters, blocking their microphones as we pushed through the doors. But their shouts followed us into the lobby like a storm echoing in the marble. Inside, the air was crisp, expensive, silent, except for the click of my heels across the polished floor. Board members in tailored suits drifted toward the elevators, casting glances at me. Some curious, some judgmental, some visibly hostile. The higher I rode in the elevator, the more my pulse climbed until it settled in my throat like a trembling fist. When the doors slid open, the corridor to the executive boardroom stretched long and bright under recessed lights. Serena Hale stood at the far end, her posture straight, her mouth curved into a predatory smile. She looked like she'd been waiting for me. "Good morning, Isabella," she purred. "You're awfully brave to show up today." "Bravery has nothing to do with it," I said. "This meeting is part of Aldrich's will. I'm not going anywhere." Serena's smile sharpened. "Oh, you are. But not in the way you think." She turned and led the way inside. The boardroom was a cavern of polished oak glass walls and a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. 12 board members sat around the long table, murmuring among themselves. At the head sat the interim chair, Miss Leland, tapping a pen against his binder. As Serena took her seat, she gestured to the empty chair on the opposite end. "Please, sit." I didn't move. "I'll stand," I said, planting myself near the presentation monitors. A whisper rippled through the room. Leland cleared his throat. "Miss Reyes, Miss Hale has challenged the validity of your inheritance. Today's session is to determine whether the board will support her petition. Or whether you'll support the truth," I replied quietly. Serena let out a soft laugh. "Truth? You still think you have any credibility?" She tapped her tablet and a monitor lit up with a headline, "Isabella Reyes under scrutiny for manipulation of dying magnate." Another tap. "Leaked emails raise doubts about Reyes' intentions." Another. "Board sources question stability of Hale's successor." She leaned back, satisfied. "Public sentiment is against you. The board understands optics. This inheritance isn't just money, Isabella. It's an empire. One that requires stability, competence, and public trust, 3 things you currently lack." A board member nodded reluctantly. Serena spread her hands. "To protect the legacy, we must preserve control within the family." not hand it to a woman drowning in scandal. I met her gaze evenly. Funny, because I'm not the one who's been sabotaging the family legacy from inside. A hush fell across the table. Serena's expression flickered only for a moment before she smoothed it into a mask. I'm afraid I don't understand. Oh, I think you do, I said. I placed Aldrich's folder on the table. The board members leaned forward. Serena's eyes narrowed. This, I continued, is Aldrich Hale's personal investigation. The one he began before he died. The one he continued even while he was sick. The one he intended for me to have. I slid out the first document. Exhibit A. Financial transfers from shell corporations tied directly to your brother, David Hale. Board member Suarez inhaled sharply. David, he funneled money into companies your uncle rejected as partners, I said. Those companies were connected to a planned hostile takeover of Hale Technologies. Murmurs erupted. Serena's jaw tightened. Anyone can doctor documents. I lifted the second page. This one came from Aldrich's encrypted drive. And this one from your uncle's safety deposit box. And this, I placed a third document forward, was verified this morning by Aldrich's attorney. Cross stepped inside the room at that moment, as if summoned by truth itself. He gave a curt nod to the board. Every document Miss Reyes holds is authenticated, he announced. Aldrich Hale's own investigation. His signature. His handwriting. Serena's composure cracked. Even if that's true, she snapped, David wasn't the only one in those companies. Your parents were too. Maybe you manipulated Aldrich because your family wanted to control the company. My family wanted to kill Aldrich, I said softly. The room froze. What Leland breathed. I opened the final section of the folder. The darkest part. Aldrich's brake lines were tampered with 11 years ago. The payments for the contractor came from shell companies linked to my parents, and when I pulled Aldrich out of that burning car, I disrupted their plan. A board member dropped his pen. Cross stepped forward. Mr. Hale believed his niece, Miss Serena Hale, was aware of the financial movement, and that her brother was involved in coordinating the offshore redirection of funds. That's a lie, Serena shouted. Ethan entered the boardroom, quietly holding a small drive. And this, he said, placing it on the table, is the security footage Aldrich's team recovered. The one Serena tried to erase. He tapped the monitor. The room watched footage of Serena entering a restricted data storage room 2 months before Aldrich died, accessing his private files, copying their contents, deleting original metadata. Serena lunged forward and slammed the laptop shut. This is a setup, no, I said. It's the truth. The door burst open. 2 federal agents strode inside. Serena Hale. She stiffened. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence related to the investigation of Aldrich Hale. Chaos exploded. Serena screamed, lunging toward me as agents grabbed her arms. You think this ends with me? You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started. Agents dragged her out, kicking and shouting. When the door slammed shut, silence choked the room. Mr. Leland removed his glasses, trembling. Miss Reyes, I have been part of this board for 20 years. I have never seen such calculated betrayal. I steadied myself. Aldrich saw it coming. That's why he left everything to someone outside the family. And now we see why, he whispered. One by one, the board members turned to face me, not as the disgraced woman on headlines, but as the heir Aldrich intended. Leland stood. All those in favor of upholding Aldrich Hale's will and recognizing Miss Isabella Reyes as the rightful beneficiary, hands rose. Every one of them. Emotion clenched around my ribs, painful and overwhelming. Ethan placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Cross nodded, once proud and quiet. As the boardroom settled, I turned toward the window. The fog had lifted. The city sprawled out beneath us, and for the first time in months I felt air fill my lungs without burning. But deep inside I knew Serena's final words weren't empty. The people behind her, the people behind my parents, would not stop. They had lost control of Hale Technologies, and they would come for me next. Yet as I stood in that room with truth on my side and Aldrich's legacy in my hands, I felt something new. Not fear, not grief, power. The power of someone who had finally stepped out of the ruins and onto the battlefield. The courtroom smelled like varnished wood and cold air, the kind that settles on your skin and refuses to leave. Rows of polished benches filled quickly with reporters, attorneys, and people who had once whispered my name with pity or suspicion. Today they whispered it with something else, anticipation. At the front sat the defendants. Serena Hale in a beige jumpsuit, her wrists cuffed, her jaw tight with rage she couldn't hide. David Hale beside her, eyes lowered, pretending not to hear the cameras clicking. And behind them, separated from the others only by circumstance, my parents. My mother wore a navy dress suit. My father a dark blazer. Both tried desperately to maintain their composure, but the truth had done its damage. Their shoulders were stiff, their faces pale, their eyes hollow from a week of televised humiliation. They refused to meet my gaze. Ethan stood to my left, hands clasped behind him, in a stance I recognized now as his version of steadying the room. Nathaniel Cross sat to my right, the black folder tucked into his briefcase, the folder that had pulled the truth from the shadows and laid it under the bright lights of justice. The judge entered. Everyone rose. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every secret that had been dragged into this room. Order in the court. We sat as the indictment was read aloud. Conspiracy, fraud, corporate sabotage, tampering with evidence in a federal investigation, attempted murder. Each charge landed like a hammer against stone, unearthing the truth layer by layer until the courtroom felt heavy with the collective shock of it all. When the judge finally turned toward the defendants, I caught the smallest flicker of movement, Serena's jaw clenching as she tried to hold herself together. Miss Hale, the judge said, you manipulated evidence, obstructed an ongoing investigation, and engaged in coordinated efforts to seize control of Hale Technologies through illegal means. Your actions were not only criminal but cruelly calculated. Serena stared at him with cold defiance. Is there anything you wish to say before sentencing? She turned her head slowly toward me. For a moment, just a moment, her anger cracked, revealing something desperate beneath it. This isn't over, she said softly. The judge didn't flinch. It is for you. 14 years. David received 11. My parents' turn came next. My father stepped forward, his voice measured, restrained. Your Honor, we did what we believed was necessary to protect our family. Your actions nearly killed an innocent man, the judge replied. And you destroyed your daughter's livelihood in the process. My mother trembled but said nothing. 10 years each. When the gavel struck, the courtroom exhaled. Some reporters scribbled, others stared. A few board members from Hale Technologies, who had supported me during the vote, sat silently witnessing the final unraveling of the conspiracy that had threatened the company they served. My parents were escorted out first. My mother looked at me as she passed, eyes, red lips trembling, but no words left her. My father didn't look at me at all. Serena was led out next. She twisted once, her voice low and sharp. You think this is justice? Just wait. You don't know the whole network. Ethan stepped between us as the marshals pulled her away. Cross touched my shoulder lightly. You did what Aldrich hoped you would. You finished his fight. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. After the sentencing, I stepped out into the courthouse courtyard. The winter air hit my face sharper than it had any right to be. Reporters surged, but Ethan guided me past them with practiced calm. The black SUV waited at the curb. When we reached the Hale estate, the clouds parted just enough for a soft, pale sunbeam to cast a glow across the front lawn. The ocean murmured below the cliffs, bending itself into silver ribbons against the rocks. Inside, Nina was waiting in the foyer. She's been asking for you every 10 minutes, she whispered with a smile. I walked down the hall past Aldrich's study, past the quiet rooms soaked in his memory until I reached the greenhouse. And there she was. Maya sat on a cushioned bench beneath the warm, humid air, her curls lit by sunlight, her eyes bright and safe again. "Mommy," she cried, running into my arms. I sank to my knees and held her, breathing in the scent of warm soil and jasmine. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in. There was no cold concrete under us, no fear lurking behind every shadow, no garage, no foreclosure, no threats, just warmth, just air, just us. "We're okay," I whispered into her hair. "We're finally okay." But even as I said it, I felt the quiet truth settle under my skin. Justice had been served, but the scars wouldn't vanish overnight. The betrayal ran deep. The wounds would take time to heal, and yet despite everything I had found a place where the future felt possible. Later, after I tucked Maya into bed and stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the sea, I unfolded Aldrich Hale's letter again. The part I had never shown anyone. The final paragraph. "You saved me once, Isabella. Not with strength, but with heart. And though I cannot walk beside you, I hope you live the life you deserve. A life defined not by the cruelty of others, but by your courage." Aldrich, I pressed the paper to my chest. Courage. Maybe that was all we ever had in the end. I stood there until the stars appeared, until the world grew quiet, until I felt the ache of the past loosen its grip. And then, speaking not to Aldrich but to the version of myself who once believed she had lost everything, I whispered, "We made it." Before I went back inside, I paused for a moment, letting the night air brush across my face. To anyone listening to this story, wherever you are, I hope you remember this. No matter how deeply the world tries to bury you, truth has a way of rising. And every time you stand back up, you write a new ending for yourself. If this journey touched you or reminded you of your own strength, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories about resilience, justice, and finding light after darkness, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay with us. There are more stories to tell, and I hope you'll be here for the next one.